Hi, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror. I'm S.A. Bradley, and I'm a lifelong movie lover, but my heart belongs to horror. My biggest thrill, however, is getting to talk to people about this stuff. I really want to start conversations with you. Now, this episode is a companion piece to Episode 4, which was known as Blood Oaths and Bar Tabs, Horror Conventions and Cinema Wasteland. That episode was about the experiences and connections we make at horror conventions, and some of the people I met were gracious enough to sit for an interview with me. In this episode, we interview Bryan Martinez, who is the creator and producer of the popular webcast The Giallo Room. He also wrote and directed a short horror film called Giallo. Yes, it's a mouthful. He also created the horror website Film Deviant. He's a really nice guy, although I'm sure he's a little crazy. Now, an interview from the abyss with Bryan Martinez.
How's it going,
hello,
everybody?
my friends.
Wait, what? Baron,
what?
I thought we rehearsed this already.
Well, Mr. Bradley asked me to come on and introduce his amazing podcast called Hellbent for Horror. I'm not altogether sure what you're trying to do.
But he is interviewing me, dude.
Well, listen. I am the star of the Giallo Room, little guy. You only edit the videos and run the Facebook page over at facebook.com/The Giallo Room. I am pretty sure that the listeners would prefer to hear me talk rather than listen to your awkward voice.
Okay, that was a little mean of you to say, Baron.
Well, I do murder models in ornate lighting accompanied by a pulsating soundtrack for fun. So...
Good point. Well, I'm going to go join Mr. Bradley for the interview then. You take care of the intro, okay?
Grazie. Anyway, I am Baron Martino, and today, Mr. S.A. Bradley and Bryan Martinez are chatting about a little thing that I am extremely passionate about called Giallo. They are discussing it here on this amazing podcast show that you should already be a subscriber to called Hellbent for Horror. And if you are not a subscriber, then I may just come and pay you a visit one of these nights. Did that sound a bit threatening? I hope not. So without further ado, here now is one of my very favorite voices of horror, Mr. S.A. Bradley.
Hi, and we're speaking with Bryan Martinez right now. We are still here at Cinema Wasteland in Strongsville, Ohio. And Bryan is the creator of the Giallo Room, as well as FilmDeviant.com. I'm going to have links to all of the stuff that Bryan has done. He's also the writer and director of a short film, a Giallo, known as Gelato Giallo. And I'll see what I can do about talking a little bit more about a Neo Giallo and see what that's all about. And with that, I'm going to start talking with Bryan at this point. So, Bryan, how did you get into horror? Who introduced you to horror?
Oh, God. It was basically, the parental thing. When you're growing up, you sort of find your own little horror cues along the way. But my mother was the... you know what? Let me tell you my first experience with horror.
Great.
We'll start there. So when the Evil Dead, the very first one that first came out, it was a video nasty, so therefore it was only available through certain people had the VHS. It just so happened that the boyfriend of the babysitter that was watching me at the time brought it over. And they popped in. They were like, "Oh, this is so exciting! Like we're not supposed to have those, But meanwhile, they didn't care that children were present in the room. So they popped in the video. A few minutes, you see Ash and his friends kind of driving in the car there, and then all of a sudden, they sort of got up and left and did their teenager thing, and here's me watching this crazy film, and I must have been, so it came out early 80s, so I must have been like, 10 years old, when I'm watching this film. And as soon as so there's that swing, and then it stops. Mm. And when you're that young, that stuff is going to start happening when you see that on the screen. And then from there on, I was just glued to the carpet, could not move. I felt like I was in shock. And they came back like right towards the end, my babysitter, her name was Sonia, beautiful person, you know. But she did give in to her teenage urges. She got upset, and she, you know, apologetic beyond belief, and meanwhile, I was introduced to this brand new thing that, you know, along the way, my mother sort of, like, she's always been a horror fan herself, so she would introduce me to certain films, you know, a lot like the Poltergeist film back then, and things like that. More bordering, like, you know, what's child friendly. That I think that was going through her mind. But she loved these films. She was. I was a kid with people saying that, like, The Exorcist was my first film because she was 8 months pregnant with me when she went to go see it in the theater. You know, I would say that would be my introduction into the world of horror. Sadly, it was a movie that probably shouldn't have. You know, I shouldn't have been introduced at that time.
I think that's usually how it goes with people. I think the forbidden is really where the hook is.
Yes.
And I think for people, they either go in the direction of, well, I'll never do that again.
Yeah.
Or they go, well, I liked how that felt.
Yeah.
I feel funny. I like feeling funny.
And that's how it was for me. It was like, so I was cemented to the carpet, but at the same time, I was going through all these different things, and I had to seek that out again. You know, so the next time, you know, maybe a few weeks later, I snuck downstairs into the living room. You know, lights were out, everybody was asleep. I had to know what happens, like, when, you know, after your parents tell you to go to sleep. So I snuck down. I turned on, I think it was HBO at the time. And it just so happened that Nightmare on Elm Street was just starting, and so you see the lamb, you know, shuffle across the frame, and then the laughter, and then the glove, and I was like, oh my God, what am I about to see here?
Wow.
Yeah, and this time I'm glued to the couch, you know, and I ended up, like, just sleeping there, because after the film was done, I shut it off and it was dark, and then I had to turn on the light, and I fell asleep there on the couch, and I got in trouble. The next day, my mother comes down, she says, what are you doing here? You know? But that was the beginning of me searching things out on my own.
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing that you talk about your mother kind of introducing you to horror, and she was a fan.
Yeah.
I think that's relatively unique in people that I talk to. For a lot of people, the parents were like, well, that's your thing, and they just kind of let them. So having the support of your mom, what do you think that did for you in seeking things out?
Oh God, it was super. I you know, with all the stuff that I do now for the genre, it's sort of, I do it as a payback to this beautiful genre that I love. But I feel like my mother is responsible for instilling that in me, so I always thank her, and I always praise her for, you know, like, it's just such she made it easily accessible. So, like, and I don't want to get into too many personal things here, but when I was younger, like, my father left when I was 6, you know, so my mother was forced to, like, take care of 2 kids on her own. And so she would work nights, or rather, the second shift, you know, so she would come home at 11. So I was sort of a latchkey kid growing up. And she would give me at the time it was West Coast Video out on the East Coast, which was, I always looked at it as weird, you know? But so she would give me the card, and after a while the clerk would know me, and he would just be like, oh, look what's new today, you know? And so I feel like she supported me in that way. She, you know, usually, like, I see what you're saying, parents are usually, you know, real, they sort of tend to shelter their kids, and that's, you know, I have an 8-year-old, and I sort of do that with him, you know. But I felt it was sort of like, well, she knows what's bad, like, she knows what's hardcore, right? Know? And she knows, you know, like I said, she would try to at least watch, like, Poltergeist, or, you know, I'm spacing out certain, you know, titles, but at the time, like, more child-friendly, you know, films. Yeah. But meanwhile, I'm at the West Coast Video, and I'm renting, you know, all this Italian stuff and whatever he had, you know. God, I remember bringing home Faces of Death one time, and my mom was like, "What are you doing here?" You know. So that was around the time when she was like, you know, let me step in and monitor some of the stuff that you're picking up, you know. But at the end of the day, it's like, I told you earlier in the weekend, like, I had a double feature, you know, when Martyrs and Inside first came out, I pulled my mom over, and I was like, hey Mom, check out what I got, you know. And so I introduced her to these crazy films, like Inside, like part of the whole French Revolution, you know.
My God, 2 great films, by the way.
Yeah.
But
so
not usual mom material.
Especially back to back, you know.
Yeah. Hi, I came from you. Watch what happens to this woman inside. You know, no hard feelings.
right, exactly. But it was sort of like, I was elated because I sort of peeked over to her and I saw in her eyes what she must have saw in my eyes way back then. You know what I mean? So granted, they're extreme films and whatnot, but it was sort of like, wow, I'm introducing my mom to, you know, these great, what I believe are amazing films, and sort of that repaying her for doing that to me, you know? Yeah. People always look at this genre as like, oh, it's for derelicts and that stuff, you know? But I look at it as a lot more personal to me. It's more, like I said earlier, it's a beautiful genre. Yeah. What
I love how you use the term beautiful in that. What do you feel is the thing that's so powerful about it? What do you think brings that beauty up for you?
For me, it's so the ones that really resonate with me in my world, in Bryan's world, which is a tiny, tiny world. It's the ones that give you that same message that you can get from, you know, like an Academy Award nominated film, but they tend to have these horror elements in it, you know. So you're watching basically a film about an individual who has mother problems, you know, and meanwhile, like, there's a lot of stuff going on around that, you know. So it's that deeper layered story, you know. That's what's always intrigued me. It's so you could be watching a straight story. For example, Psycho, which is the one I just brought up. Like, you could literally paint a bunch of different environments to that central story, and it could be, I you know, sort of hesitate saying that you could make it into comedy, or make it into, you know,
Hitchcock may have thought it was.
Yeah, exactly. So what intrigues me about it is those relatable aspects, you know, like when I was growing up, like I said, I didn't really have a father. So I saw Psycho, and to me it was that opposite role. It was like that, you know, he's dealing with mommy issues, I'm dealing with father issues, you know. So I attached myself to that as well. Like Night of the Living Dead, I really attached myself to when I was younger, not so much anymore, but I had a lot of racial stuff going on. You know, there was an incident, and forgive me for getting like personal or whatever, but there was an incident where I would go over to my friend's house, and my friend, you know, after weeks of hanging out, he would tell me, dude, like, you know, they're saying that they don't like you coming over here anymore, you know. I was like, what's going on? And he was like, I don't know, the guy's a douchebag. Like, he just doesn't like your color, your skin color. And I was like, and that, honestly, like, when you're that young, you're just like, well, that's weird, you know.
Right.
You know, but like when you're watching a film like Night of the Living Dead, and the central figure is a black man, and he's the hero, you know, and then at the end, you know, I don't know if there's anybody that's
right.
ever seen
Can we say it's a spoiler when the movie's 45 years old, right?
Right. But the most intriguing aspect is that I connected with that hero, you know, because at the time, you know, you didn't get a lot of movies with like a racially diverse person as the main character of the film, you know. So I understood that right off the bat, you know. Whereas somebody's watching a movie with zombies, I'm watching something with a lot more.
Right.
So I think that's the connection with me, like with anything. And even now with like these Italian films, I find things, and it might sound a little demented for me to say that, but I find little things that I connect with here and there. You know? And I think that's always been, with me, it's always been the personal journey. And I think with everybody too, but, you know.
Yeah, there's a tapping in to something.
Yes.
And that's what, for me, horror, I always say it's the place where metaphor and allegory can still live.
Yes.
And you can have feelings about things on multiple layers, even though it can be incredibly simplistic. In fact, simpler the better for a lot of these films. Yeah. And yet, some are ornate and baroque and complex. Right. And that kind of brings me to what I know is your favorite, and I think is actually going to be interesting for people to hear about, because oddly enough, I know what Giallo is, you know what Giallo is, and there are several people who do that are obviously at this convention.
Yes.
But when I brought up the kind of films that I was going to talk about on a first podcast, people were like, what is a glass eye and what is Giallo?
Yeah.
I was like, really?
Yeah.
And you forget that it's not that obvious. So if you want to give a real quick rundown on what Giallo is, and we'll talk about that.
Sure. So basically, Giallo films are people call it a subgenre. I call it a full-fledged genre. It's basically, back in the 1920s, a publishing company from Italy called Mondadori put out these mystery thriller type novels that were basically the kind of pulp novels that you would get back then. And along the years, they were the Italians would call them Giallo because of their yellow covers. There was just slang. Oh, you're going to get some Giallo today,
Mm-hmm.
And then so the very first Giallo, everybody says that Bava created everything, but technically the very first Giallo, and I only say Giallo because it was literally adapted from a Giallo book. Was The Postman Always Rings Twice, and not a lot of people know that. Yeah. But technically, if you want to take it to that, like that was the first one that was adapted from these things. Fast forward years later, and people look at The Girl Who Knew Too Much as the very first Giallo because it incorporates a lot of these elements. I look at Blood and Black Lace as the very first one that laid down the foundation for what would be the genre thereafter. All these just so.
What makes it look? You look at a Giallo and you go, "There it is. Right. That's Giallo."
And I don't mean to give you the long version of what a Giallo is, but I think it's important to know where they come from.
Right.
And so a lot of people would look at, they're just these exploitation 70s films with a lot of nudity and some murder. But I feel it goes deeper than that. It's that ballet, that combination of music and sight and just this operatic feeling that you have. It's so much bigger. And I don't mean to throw any jabs at slasher films or whatever, but I just feel like it's when you're going into a Giallo film, there's just so many layers. There's a red herring, there's a mystery that needs to be solved by the end of the film, and a lot of times the mystery isn't solved until the last 2 minutes of the film, because it gives you all these different twists. And there's always this black glove killer, of course, and wielding his favorite, whether it be a switchblade or some kind of rudimentary weapon, and I feel it just gives the film that much more style,
Yeah.
And when I look at films, whether they be new or old or whatnot, I kind of always look to that now, you can go watch a movie, any horror movie that you want, but I feel like with me, it's more like I like something with a little bit of flash and style to it. I like something where I'm going to be searching out the soundtrack after I watch this film.
Right.
I want something that stays in me much longer than just that was nice. It had, naked females running around the woods or whatever. But and you leave it and you move on. With me, with these Giallo films, it's like if you want to watch something that lasts for a long time, and that's why when they're re-releasing all these new film or old classics in new formats, I think it's great because it's like the Arrow films Blood and Black Lace, that's the best that film has ever looked. It looks gorgeous, and if you want to start from there, that's that hook. It'll hook you, and if trust me, and this is for your listeners, if it doesn't hook you, you don't have a pulse. The movie is just beautiful.
Right. Yeah, Bob, it's a truly fascinating movie, to say the least. And that's one of the interesting things. I like Giallo, and I want you to talk about it a little bit because it's some of the most ornate in camera work. The lighting is very, very stagey in some ways and colorful and vibrant, and yet so well done. Some of the cinematography that is in Giallo is some of the best you'll find in horror. And yet, it has this thing of being some of the roughest stuff out there. This is some of the more nihilistic violence that is in film. So it has this weird thing of this great beauty and this real nasty extreme extreme stuff that can happen. So, what's the fascination there?
It's and again, maybe I'm revealing a little too much about myself or whatever. But it's so when you take a look at the boom, the golden age of Giallo, if you will, it's basically from the late 60s to the mid 70s. You get this whole grouping of these like films that just like broke through the door, but it all started with Bava. And if you watch Blood and Black Lace, it's a beautiful film, but there's a lot of violent stuff that goes on in there. Anytime you watch a movie where the killer is taking a bear clawed weapon into a woman's face, that's hard to take.
Right.
But it's done in this gorgeous filter, and just the way that he looks is just really striking. And so I feel like it was sort of a competition back then. It was like, so Bava gave you this, my name is Argento, and I'm going to give you this, and,
Dario
my
Argento.
name is Lenzi, and I'm going to give you this.
Barrel Lenzi.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I felt back then it was like they were making these films, and they were, like Bird with the Crystal Plumage was a box office success when it came out. Yeah. And so as soon as the Italians see box office success, boom, we're going to start doing these. Same thing with the Sword and Sandal movies, and later on with the cannibal films. So I felt it was a great era because everybody was competing with each other. They were trying to make these movies as fast and quick and as cheap as they could, but at the same time they were like, I see what Argento's doing. Let me try to kick it up another notch, and do something better. And granted, there was a lot of Giallo isn't necessarily a genre that's like, every film you're going to see is high level.
Right.
You do have the very sadistic ones and the very depraved ones as well. But I feel like, excuse me, with any subgenre or any category of film, whether it be comedy or action or whatever, you're going to get the ones that are high the watermark, the high mark of like, this is what you're supposed to do. And then you get the ones that are down here, down to lower level, and those are the ones that are done really cheap and quick, but they still sort of mean something to different people. Like, for example, let me fast forward a little bit to Strip Nude for Your Killer. Andrea Bianchi was working on so many different levels, and it's people look at that film and they crack up at it because it's so entertaining on so many different levels. But the pacing for me is genius. Like the music is so memorable in that film, and then from there you step into something like the New York Ripper, which touches on a different tone.
Yes, very much.
And I love that film, But when you look at the New York Ripper and you compare it to something like Lizard in a Woman's Skin, it's the same director, it's the same person from the same person's mind, but it's like many layers of that person's mind, and you get one that's absolutely brutal and just almost soul crushing when you're watching it. And then you get one that's really beautiful and really mesmerizing. You almost puts you in a trance.
What I liked about Giallo was that it kind of, not that there hadn't been surreality in horror before, but there was definitely an uptick in dream logic through these films. And so what you're seeing in this extreme violence, it's happening in a dream in a weird way. So it hits you heavier, but it also kind of releases you from responsibility in that dream spot. What do you think, you mentioned Dario Argento, who's a name that's rather big in the industry. What do you think he brought to Giallo and then to cinema that was so unique?
I absolutely agree. I think he was in a, because you come out, you debut with a film like Bird with the Crystal Plumage, it's like, oh my God, this guy's he's a revelation, like he's bringing us something brand new, and it's amazing. And then he follows that up with the Animal trilogy, and then it's sort of like he put himself up to a certain standard, and then because not a lot of people know this, but after he finished the Animal trilogy, he decided to try his hand at comedy, you know, and people didn't respond to that very well, you know. So because of that, and I think it was in spite of that, he gave us Deep Red, you know, Profondo Rosso.
Yeah.
And that film is always looked at as the standard. That, you know, you want to see the best Giallo film ever, Profondo Rosso. You know, so I feel like he just ratcheted things up on a higher level. You know, for me, like I feel like he gave us these crazy nightmarish dreams, and people tend to lump in like Inferno and Suspiria into the Giallo, you know, category, which I feel like it's got a lot of Giallo elements in it. But
Supernatural.
Yeah, it's more of horror based, you know. And then he came back with Tenebrae, which I regard as probably the last great Giallo film ever made, you know. So I feel that he definitely contributed the backbone to Jolly. You know, he laid the foundation. You know, Bava introduced it, and then, you know, Bava also made some really great films. You know, you know, some of his work is regarded as like the precursor to slasher. You can actually tend to link slashers to, you know, Giallo, and then even before that, Psycho and some of the earlier films. You know, I get that everything comes from something. You know, but when you come out with like Bay of Blood, and then, you know, Friday the 13th just blatantly inserts that into, you know,
welcome Spear World.
Exactly. And, you know, not a lot of people know that. They look at the Friday the 13th films and they're like, oh, these are great films, you know, but they don't go, you know, before that.
Yeah. Well, that's what's awesome about the group that I've found here at Cinema Wasteland.
Yes.
There are many people, and it doesn't take away from the enjoyment that they have in films, but they'll see a sequence that I know comes directly from another movie.
Yes.
Like, I didn't mention it yesterday, but when we were talking about The Strangers,
yes,
I was going to say that is a direct homage from oh my goodness, In Cold Blood.
Yeah, okay.
The opening of In Cold Blood is
okay.
the same kind of opening that there is for The Strangers, except that there's blood on the door and there's a hole.
Yeah.
But it's a lot darker, black and white. But you don't know that unless you see the movies.
Right.
You know, you can read about it, sure, but when you see them enough, you start making these great connections. Mm-hmm. And what's fun about the group is that we have the ability to talk on that level, but also inform others about that. I think that allows people to jump to the backwards in a way and get a little bit deeper. So how did you get involved with Cinema Wasteland? How long have you been coming?
Oh man, honestly, this is my second time, you know, and a lot of people, like, when I go down there, everybody's like, oh, there's Bryan, you know, but honestly, this is my, I'm sort of kind of still a virgin to this. But my first time was because Geretta from Demons. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a huge Demon nut.
I'm trying not to go there because
another half an hour. But she was one of the guests, and I was like, oh, I have to go, you know. And John told me, just like he told you, Cinema Wasteland is just be prepared. It's just on a different level, you know. It's you go to this con and this con and I believe I heard you talking to John about it earlier, but usually it's the, I want to get a, you know, now like a $80 autograph by said celebrity or this, or a photo op for $100, you know. That's fine, like I'm not taking that away from people, you know, but I feel like if you want great conversation, if you want to bond with people about these films that mean so much to us, you know, a little bit of a shout out to a new friend of mine. Just met him last night, as a matter of fact. His name is Jimmy, and we struck up a conversation about demons for just about an hour, you know, just talking about, you know, a lot of things that he's already known. But the thing is, it's like, you meet somebody and you connect on that level. You know, you can do that at other, you know, conventions. You know, I'm not saying, oh my God, Cinema Wasteland is exclusive.
Right.
But it's really unique in the way that everybody's on the same level, or I should say mostly everybody's on the same level. And that level is, it's a hard to find thing, you know. I think we were talking about it before, yesterday, when we were saying how a lot of people look at horror as a genre as, you know, it's not a favorable subject whenever you
Right.
bring it up. You take a day off to go to this convention, and your boss kind of side eyes you and looks at you kind of weird.
Yeah.
And it's always going to be that. There's nothing that's going to change.
Right.
I mean, horror delves into a very primal thing inside all of us. So that very primal thing isn't necessarily a very not enjoy. Is what you'll find that I'm a very awkward person, and I tend to hang on a certain word,
Right?
But not a favorable thing. Like
Right.
not a lot of people like to look inside themselves and see what
Right.
scares them the most.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's missing, and what in society, modern society, not like last week,
Yeah.
but especially on Western side, we sit here and we want to accentuate the positive and kind of see how we can fix the negative,
Yeah.
as opposed to saying, well, maybe the negative is part of us,
Right.
and it's the
Right.
shadow,
Right.
and it's okay
Right.
to be okay with the shadow.
Right.
Just doesn't
Yes.
have to eat
Yeah.
everything. And there's something about horror
Yeah.
that allows you to have that moment of feeding that shadow and
Yeah.
say, okay, son, I don't want you coming out and destroying my marriage.
Yeah.
Let's do
Right.
this
Right.
instead.
Right.
And that kind of thing is what I think is very medicinal about it. And,
Yes.
what you mentioned about the cons, what I found in cons,
Mm-hmm.
is that there's always a group like this, but it's kind of like the kids that smoke behind the school.
Yes. Right.
Here it's a whole school of
Yeah.
kids that smoke behind the
Right,
school.
right.
And
Perfectly put.
yeah, it's awesome in that way.
Yeah, and this will probably be the first and only time that this film is brought up in any kind of horror conversation. But I watch a lot of Pixar films with my son. He loves them.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to go see Inside Out with him in the theater.
Uh-huh.
And it encapsulates perfectly what you were talking about in terms of sometimes it's okay to have the sad with the happy.
Right.
It's that concept of accepting all of what is going on inside of you, literally, and embracing all these things, because sometimes the sadness goes right in hand with the happiness. Sometimes the fear goes right in hand with being brave. So I feel that just growing up, I've always been an individual that I felt that it's very important to look inside you and deal with all these things rather than just push them aside and, like you said, try to fix certain things, because these things cannot be fixed.
Yeah.
So I think bringing everything back to Giallo, it's that very same thing. Like Dario Argento had this great quote back in the 80s where he said something along the lines, I'm not quoting him correctly, but he said if he wasn't doing these things, he would probably be, if he wasn't directing these films, he'd probably be doing a lot of the things that he puts in his films. And I think that's very brave to say that, because seriously, this world is full of billions of people, and not everybody's the same, And I'm not saying that, if I wasn't doing the Giallo Room, I'd be out, murdering supermodels or whatever. But, like I said, going back, it taps into a very primal aspect inside of us all,
Yeah.
And I feel that sometimes it's important to satiate these things with these certain elements, so you live life, happier and more freely.
Yeah.
And, you exercise these demons, and then that way,
Yeah.
like you have a nice day.
Well, that's one of the funniest things, is that you're probably the most upbeat guy
Yeah.
that I know in the group and even
Thank you.
around the
Thank you so
place.
much.
And you happen to be the biggest fan of the most depraved group of movies out of the people that I know.
Right,
I mean,
right.
some of them are like Universal Horror, and some of them get into slash and stuff. But Giallo is really there's an element to that.
Right.
So I find that very, very exciting and interesting and wonderful.
Yeah.
Because as you mentioned, what Argento said, John Waters pretty much said the same thing. If he didn't make the movies he did, he goes, I'm not weird, my movies are.
Yeah.
And that's because I get to make those movies, so
Yes.
I'm not in jail.
Yeah. Right.
And allowing that expression is so great.
Right.
And, you've done, thanks so much, first off, for giving me all this time.
God, thank
and
you.
you have a million things that you have your fingers in. So what I want to do is, instead of me closing up, I want you to tell me what people should be looking at for you, promote your page and your movie and all of that.
So you allotted an extra half an hour.
Yeah, right.
No,
I'm going to go use the bathroom now.
I'm going to try to keep it simple. My passion right now is the Giallo Room. It's something that I feel is very different. There's a lot of, you go on YouTube and there's a lot of people doing unboxing videos and all these, they're fine for what they are. But I feel like my channel is the only one where you'll see an actual killer, an Italian killer, reviewing movies, you know. And, you know, I work with a gentleman named Baron Martino, who's of that old school. He does not know anything about, you know, technical stuff, so he has me edit all the videos and all that stuff, you know. I run the Facebook page because he would throw the laptop out the window if he tried, you know. And he's somebody that's very, if you think I'm obsessed with these films, he wears his leather gloves daily, you know, like he goes to I was kidding with him the other day because he went to the grocery store in his full getup, you know. But I think that's part of his charm, you know. It's something that I'm in love with right now. We have a YouTube channel and a Facebook page. You can go to facebook.com/The Giallo Room. And also Film Deviant has always been a passion of mine. We started back in 2010. There's not a lot of content on there right now, but my friend Matt Dean, he's going to be taking over real soon. And there'll be hopefully a nice flood of new content on there soon.
Is it reviews, essays?
Reviews, more so. I personally have been drifting off to the commentary aspect of writing, you know, so there's a lot of horror commentary on just different aspects of horror, you know. So there's that. And then, like you mentioned at the top of this show, I did a short film last year. It's crazy because the film is going to, actually this month, it's going to be playing in Berlin, you know. And it trips me out because it's like we made this short little tiny film and now it's doing its thing. But we start shooting the first ever Giallo web series called The Demon Kills in White. And we're hoping to, it's going to be 6 episodes. We're hoping to get that done before the summer so we can premiere it in the fall. So that's something that I'm very excited to do. We just wrapped an Into the Void production called Writer's Block. So that will be making its round soon. You know? So yeah, there's, like I said, I'm the kind of individual that, you know, if I'm just sitting in place for 5 minutes, I think of a new thing to do. And I give myself more work, and I hate that I do that, but it's like a necessary evil for me.
And to add to it, you decided, I can give you a half hour of my time, Bradley. No problem. I can.
But, you know,
I don't need to pack.
I love what you do here. You know, Hellbent for Horror is one of those podcasts that not only gives you a new aspect of horror with every episode, it gives you that personal touch, and it gives you that, you know, the first Kiss episode that you did really spoke to me because it was like, man, like a lot of people are like, oh, what's your first experience with, you know, your first kiss, you know, do you remember your first kiss? Everybody remembers their first kiss. Yeah. And it locks into, like I said, that primal aspect because it's like that first thing that hooks you and, you know, sort of rings your bell and says, hey, this is something that you need to pay attention to, you know. And some people look at that first kiss and they move on and do other stuff. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people like you and I look at that first kiss and obsess over it. Yeah, and
we're screwed.
Yeah, exactly. So when you're kissed that very first time, it's like, man, do you know the path that you're about to embark on? You know? So yeah, I please, when you asked me to do this podcast, it was my pleasure and my honor to be here with you. Yeah. I love the show that you created.
Well, thank you so much, Bryan. And that's Bryan Martinez, and I will have links to all of the work that he's doing. It may take 2 World Wide Webs to be able to put them all down there. But I want to thank everybody for listening. And until next time, stay hellbent. And thanks for listening, folks. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can subscribe to Hellbent for Horror on iTunes and Stitcher. And if you like the show, please consider writing a review on iTunes. It really helps. You can find more on our Facebook page at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and I'm on Twitter at hellbenthorror. You can also find out more info on my website, hellbentforhorror.com. Till next time, stay hellbent.